Welcome back, and thank you for tuning in to HK Cheating Stories. We appreciate each and every one of you joining us. Where in the world are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. Now, let's get the story started. My name is Greg, and up until a year ago, I thought I had a good life. A stable job, two beautiful daughters, and a wife I had loved for over a decade. I wasn't perfect, no man is, but I believed in my marriage. I believed in her. Then, one Halloween night, everything changed. It wasn't the way she laughed at another man's jokes. It wasn't the stolen glances or the way she leaned in just a little too close. It was the moment I realized I wasn't the only man in my marriage. And once that truth hit me, there was no going back. Halloween night had always been Laura's favorite. The costumes, the excitement, the chance to dress up and become someone else for a night. It was everything she loved. I never cared much for it, but I went along with it for her. This year was no different. As we stepped into the house, the party was already in full swing. Laughter, music, and the clinking of glasses filled the air. The place was packed with familiar faces, all dressed in ridiculous or extravagant costumes. I adjusted the pirate hat on my head, feeling a little out of place, while Laura, in her tight, jet black Catwoman outfit, fit right in. Heads turned as we walked in, but not because of me. Laura had always been beautiful, but tonight, she was downright stunning. The leather hugged every curve, her dark hair cascading in loose waves, and the mask over her eyes only added to the mystery. She turned to me with a smirk, gave me a quick kiss on the cheek, and then, just like that, she was gone, disappearing into the crowd like smoke. I should have been used to it by now. Laura was the social one, the life of the party. Meanwhile, I made my way toward the drinks table, where a few of my buddies were engaged in a heated debate. Hulk or Superman? The age-old question. I grabbed a beer and joined in, tossing out a few points about Superman's invulnerability, his flight, his strength. The argument intensified, alcohol fueling the passion, but something felt off. My mind wasn't in it. Every few minutes, my eyes drifted across the room, searching for Laura. And then I saw him. Jake, dressed as Tarzan. His costume was nothing more than a cheap loincloth and some fake jungle accessories. His long dark hair was tied back, his thick beard giving him a wild, rugged look. He was built like a damn gladiator. No surprise, considering he worked a physically demanding job. But what really pissed me off wasn't his ridiculous attempt to show off his physique in freezing October weather. It was the way he was looking at my wife. I watched as he leaned in close, whispering something in her ear. She laughed, placing a hand lightly on his forearm. It was casual, effortless. But I knew better. I clenched my jaw, gripping my beer tighter. Jake had always been the guy who flirted with every woman in the room, married or not. The type who thrived on attention, who pushed boundaries just to see how far he could go. Most women, including Laura, had always laughed it off as harmless fun. But I never liked it. And tonight, something about the way she responded made my stomach tighten. I forced myself to stay put, to not jump to conclusions, to not cause a scene over nothing. Greg, man, you good? My friend nudged me, noticing my distraction. I shook my head, plastering on a fake smile. Yeah, just got lost in thought. But I wasn't lost in thought. I was watching. As the party went on, I kept an eye on Laura, pretending to be engaged in conversations, nodding along while my mind raced. Then, I caught something that made my blood run cold. Laura wasn't just talking to Jake. She was watching him. Her gaze trailed over his chest, his arms, her lips slightly parted as if she were appraising him. And for a split second, just a split second, there was something in her eyes. Something I recognized immediately. Desire. It hit me like a punch to the gut. Who dresses as Tarzan in this weather? I muttered to myself, but the bitterness in my voice was unmistakable. Laura turned back to me, snapping out of whatever trance she was in. She smiled, brushing a hand over my arm. You know Jake, sweetheart. Always needing the spotlight. I forced a chuckle, but the taste of my beer suddenly soured. She studied me for a moment, then smirked. Are you jealous? Jealous? Maybe. Or maybe it was something worse. I don't need to strip down to get attention, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. She just laughed, patting my chest. Of course not, honey. But the look in her eyes before she turned back to Jake told me everything. I was losing her, and I didn't even know when it had started. I tried to shake it off. Maybe I was overthinking things. Maybe the drinks were just messing with my head. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. The party raged on, but the music, the laughter, the buzz of conversation, it all became background noise. My mind was fixated on Laura and Jake. Every time I glanced in their direction, they were closer, whispering, laughing, exchanging those subtle, fleeting glances that most people wouldn't think twice about. But I noticed, because I knew my wife. I forced myself to act normal, to keep up appearances. After all, I was supposed to be the easygoing guy, the one who didn't get rattled. But the longer I watched them, the harder it became to keep my cool. At some point, Laura disappeared into the kitchen. I watched as Jake followed moments later, his movement casual, too casual, like he didn't want to be obvious. That was all I needed. I put my drink down and made my way through the crowd, heart pounding harder with every step. Maybe they were just grabbing another drink. Maybe they were talking about something innocent. But then again, maybe they weren't. And I had to know. I reached the kitchen doorway and paused. They hadn't seen me yet. Laura was leaning against the counter, her arms crossed, head tilted slightly as she smiled up at him. Jake stood close, too close. His arm rested casually beside her, trapping her between him and the counter. He was smirking, that same cocky expression I'd seen 100 times before. Then he said something too low for me to hear, and Laura laughed, soft, breathy, almost flirtatious. That laugh, that damn laugh. I'd heard it before. It wasn't her usual polite chuckle, the one she gave co-workers or acquaintances. No, this was different. This was the kind of laugh she used when she was interested, when she was playing along. Rage flared in my chest. Having fun? I asked, stepping into the room. Both of them froze. Laura turned to me, her smile faltering just a little before she recovered. Greg, hey, I was just looking for you. I let my eyes linger on her for a second before shifting my gaze to Jake. His smirk didn't fully disappear, but I saw the flicker of hesitation in his eyes. I've been in the same place all night, I said flatly. What were you two talking about? Laura hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. Oh, nothing, she said too quickly. Jake was just being his usual flirty self. You know how he is. I stared at her. Yeah, I do. Jake chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. Relax, man. Just having a little harmless fun. Harmless. That word rang in my ears like a taunt. Right, I said, my voice tight. Harmless. I wasn't sure who I was trying to convince, him or myself. Laura placed a hand on my arm. Honey, I'm just a little tipsy. Don't read too much into it, okay? I glanced down at her fingers resting on my sleeve, then back up at her face. There was something in her eyes, something pleading. Was it guilt? Fear? A silent request for me to drop it? I didn't know. And that was the problem. Jake exhaled, as if relieved that the moment had passed, and reached for a drink on the counter. You know, Greg, you should lighten up. You always act so tense. No wonder, Laura. He stopped himself, but it was too late. My blood turned ice cold. No wonder, Laura, what? I asked, my voice low, dangerous. Jake just grinned. Nothing, man. Just saying she's a free spirit. She likes to have fun. My fists clenched at my sides. Laura's eyes darted between us, sensing the tension thickening. Come on, let's not do this, she said quickly. Greg, it's just Jake being Jake. He doesn't mean anything by it. But something in her voice told me she knew that wasn't true. Jake downed his drink, then leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. You ever wonder, Greg? My jaw tightened. Wonder what? He smirked, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. How much fun she could have if you weren't holding her back. I don't remember making the decision to move. One second I was standing there, the next I had him by the collar, shoving him hard against the counter. The glass in his hand hit the floor, shattering. The kitchen fell silent. Jake chuckled under his breath, unfazed. Touched a nerve, huh? My grip tightened. You keep my wife's name out of your damn mouth. He just smirked. Or what? For a second, I imagined slamming my fist into his smug face, watching that arrogant smile disappear. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I leaned in closer. You think I don't see it? I said, my voice deadly calm. The way you look at her? The way she looks at you. Jake raised his eyebrows in mock innocence. Hey, if you've got trust issues, that's on you. My stomach churned. Because the worst part? He wasn't wrong. I released him with a shove, stepping back. He straightened his collar, laughing as if it was all some big joke. Laura grabbed my arm, eyes wide with panic. Greg, please. Let's just go home. But I barely heard her. Because in that moment, I realized something. I wasn't just angry at Jake. I was angry at her. Because a part of me, the part that had been watching, analyzing, piecing things together, knew this wasn't nothing. Something had changed, and I wasn't sure if I could ever get it back. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears, my breath coming in short, ragged bursts as I stood there, fists clenched at my sides. The way Jake smirked at me, completely unbothered, made my blood boil. Laura was still gripping my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "Greg, please," she whispered, desperation laced in her voice. "Let's just go." But I wasn't going anywhere. Not yet. Jake rolled his shoulders, shaking off the tension like it was nothing. "You're making a scene, man," he chuckled, still playing the same arrogant game he always did. "Relax. No need to get all worked up." Worked up? I took a step closer, closing the distance between us again. "You want to tell me what the hell you meant by that?" I growled. "Because I swear to God, if you don't." "Greg." Laura pulled at me harder this time. "Let's just go home." Her voice wavered, like she was terrified of what might happen next. But I wasn't afraid. Not of Jake. Not of the truth. Jake leaned in just enough so that only I could hear him. His breath reeked of whiskey and cheap beer. "Oh, come on, Greg. You really think I'm full of it?" He let out a low, mocking laugh. "You should ask your wife." My heart stopped. My stomach twisted into knots, so tight I thought I might be sick. I turned to Laura, the question already forming in my mind, but I didn't have to ask. Because the look in her eyes, wide, panicked, guilty, told me everything. It was true. My body reacted before my mind could catch up. I swung. My fist connected with Jake's jaw, the impact sending him stumbling backward into the counter. Glass shattered. Someone screamed. Chaos erupted around us. Jake barely had time to recover before I was on him again, grabbing him by the front of his stupid loincloth costume and shoving him against the fridge. "You son of a bitch." I roared, my voice barely recognizable. "How long? How long?" He tried to shove me off, but I was stronger, fueled by rage and betrayal. He grunted, his hands pushing at my chest. "Back off, man. Back off." I pulled my arm back, ready to hit him again, but before I could, someone grabbed me from behind. "Greg, stop." It was Richard. He was yanking me backward, trying to keep me from doing something I'd regret, but regret was the last thing on my mind. Jake wiped the blood from his mouth, laughing. "Damn, Greg. Didn't know you had it in you." That smirk. That damn smirk. Laura was crying now, hands pressed to her mouth as if she could somehow hold back the truth that had already spilled out into the open. I shook off Richard's grip and turned to her. "You knew. You knew, didn't you?" My voice cracked. "Tell me the truth, Laura." Tears streamed down her face. "Greg, did you sleep with him?" The party had gone completely silent. Every set of eyes was locked on us, the air thick with tension. No one dared to speak. Laura's lip trembled. I made a mistake." That was all I needed to hear. I took a step back, the room tilting slightly as if I'd been punched in the gut. My whole body felt numb. Sophie pushed through the crowd, shoving past Richard. "What the hell is going on?" she demanded. Jake straightened, rubbing his jaw. "Guess the cat's out of the bag." Sophie's head snapped to Laura. You slept with my husband?" Laura's sobs deepened, her hands trembling as she reached towards Sophie. I didn't mean for it to happen, but Sophie wasn't having it. She lunged. I barely had time to react before Sophie's fists started flying. She clawed at Laura's arms, screaming obscenities, her voice raw with betrayal. "You backstabbing bitch." Richard and another guy rushed in to pull her off before it got worse, but the damage was already done. Jake, bleeding from the mouth, just stood there, shaking his head. "Damn, you two really know how to throw a party." I didn't even think. I swung again. This time, he wasn't so lucky. My fist connected hard with his cheekbone, and he crumpled to the floor. The room exploded into chaos. Screams. Yelling. People rushing in different directions. But all I could hear was the deafening sound of my own breathing. I turned to Laura, who was still crying, her mascara running in thick black streaks down her face. "We need to talk," she whispered, her voice breaking. I let out a bitter laugh. "No, you and I have nothing left to talk about." Then I walked out. Out of the kitchen. Out of the house. Out of whatever was left of the life I thought I had. I didn't remember getting to my car. 1 second, I was in that house, surrounded by gasps, whispers, and the weight of my wife's betrayal. The next, I was gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, my breath coming in ragged bursts as if I had just run a marathon. My heart was still hammering against my ribs, but it wasn't from the fight. It was from the realization. She had done it. She had actually done it. I stared blankly at the windshield, the world outside blurry through the condensation of my breath. My own wife, my partner, the mother of my children, had slept with that bastard. And worse, she had looked at me, right in my face, and lied. The front door of the house burst open, and I saw her. Laura. Her Catwoman costume was disheveled, her hair a tangled mess from Sophie's attack, but none of that mattered. Her eyes locked onto mine through the darkness, filled with desperation. She was crying, shouting my name as she ran barefoot across the lawn, pushing past party guests who stood frozen, their drinks in hand, watching our marriage fall apart like some twisted reality show. I should have driven off. I should have peeled out of there, left her standing in the cold, let her deal with the wreckage she created. But I hesitated. A split second, just enough for her to reach the car. She yanked the passenger door open, collapsing into the seat, breathless and trembling. "Greg, please," she sobbed, gripping my arm like it was the only thing keeping her from falling apart. "Please don't leave like this. We need to talk. Talk. Talk." I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head as I turned to her, my voice calm but laced with venom. "Oh, now you want to talk?" She swallowed hard, nodding. "Yes. Yes, I do. I need to explain." "Explain what, Laura?" I snapped, my patience unraveling like a frayed rope. "Explain how you ended up in bed with Jake? Explain how you humiliated me in front of everyone we know? Or, better yet, explain how long you were planning on keeping it a secret before that moron spilled the truth." She flinched, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. No, I cut her off. "Save it. I don't want to hear your excuses." I reached over and grabbed the handle of the passenger door, ready to shove it open and force her out, but she tightened her grip on my arm. "Greg, please," she choked out. "I messed up, okay? I know I did. But don't do this. Don't walk away like this." "Like this?" I echoed, staring at her in disbelief. "How the hell else am I supposed to walk away, Laura? Should I have smiled? Shaken hands with Jake? Thanked him for doing what? What? Apparently, I couldn't." She shook her head furiously, her fingers digging into my skin. "That's not what this is about." I yanked my arm free, my temper dangerously close to boiling over again. "Then tell me, Laura, what is this about? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks pretty damn simple." She looked at me then, really looked at me, like she was seeing me for the first time. The tears, the regret, the desperation, it was all there. But there was something else, too. Anger. And that pissed me off even more. "What are you mad about?" I asked, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "Are you mad that you got caught? That your perfect little secret just blew up in your face? Or," I let out a hollow chuckle, shaking my head, "are you mad that I didn't just ignore it like some idiot husband who refuses to see what's right in front of him?" She wiped at her face furiously, her breath hitching. "No, Greg. I'm mad because you left me long before I ever touched Jake." I went still. Her words hit me harder than any punch Jake had landed. She inhaled sharply, as if the confession had escaped before she could stop it. "You shut me out," she continued, her voice trembling. "You've been distant, cold like I wasn't even there. I tried to reach you, Greg. I tried to be patient. But every time I needed you, you weren't there." I clenched my jaw, gripping the steering wheel again. "So that makes it okay? That justifies screwing my best friend's husband?" "No." She shook her head violently. "No, it doesn't. But damn it, Greg, I was lonely. And you didn't even notice." I stared at her, the weight of her words pressing down on me like an avalanche. Was she right? Had I been distant? I didn't know anymore. All I knew was that I had trusted her, and she had betrayed me. I exhaled slowly, turning my gaze back to the road. "You're not coming home with me." "Greg." I cut her off. "Get out." She froze. "What?" I turned to her, my face void of any emotion. "You heard me. Get out." She stared at me, her lips trembling, eyes begging for something, anything, to hold on to. But there was nothing left to give. Slowly, she reached for the door handle, hesitating just for a moment before finally stepping out into the cold night. As soon as the door shut, I threw the car into drive, my tires screeching against the pavement as I peeled out of that driveway like I was escaping a nightmare. Because that's exactly what it was. A nightmare I could never wake up from. I don't remember much of the drive after I left Laura standing there in the cold. I don't remember the turns I took, the red lights I ran, or the faces of pedestrians who might have caught a glimpse of the wreck of a man behind the wheel. All I remember is the silence. No music, no buzzing phone, just the low hum of my tires against the pavement and the dull, aching roar in my chest that refused to fade. At some point, I ended up in front of a bar. Not just any bar, Moe's. The kind of place where broken men went to drown their sorrows in cheap whiskey and bad decisions. The neon sign flickered above me like some cruel invitation, and before I even realized what I was doing, I was inside, sliding onto a stool like it was second nature. The bartender, Karen, raised an eyebrow when she saw me. She'd been serving drinks long enough to recognize a man on the edge. "Rough night?" she asked, drying a glass. I let out a dry, humorless laugh. "You could say that." She poured me a whiskey without another word. I downed it in one go, the burn searing its way down my throat, but it didn't make a dent in the hollowness inside me. So I had another, and another. The minutes bled into hours. People came and went, their conversations turning into white noise. I didn't care. I wasn't there for company. I was there to forget. But no matter how much I drank, one image refused to leave my mind. Laura, standing in that driveway, tears on her face, telling me I had left her long before she had ever touched Jake. Had I? Was she right? I gritted my teeth and shook my head, slamming my glass onto the counter. No, she didn't get to twist this around. She didn't get to rewrite history to make herself the victim. She had betrayed me. She had humiliated me. And yet, here I was, feeling guilty for something I didn't even do. "Another?" Karen asked, hesitating. I nodded. "Keep him coming." I didn't know how many I had after that. I lost count after the fifth, maybe the sixth. My body was heavy, my mind foggy, and I could feel myself slipping, drifting into a dark, comfortable nothingness. That's when I heard his voice. "Jesus, Greg. You look like hell." I blinked, trying to focus. "Richard." He was standing next to me, arms crossed, concern etched into his face. I scowled. "What the hell are you doing here?" He pulled out the stool beside me and sat down. "Looking for you. Where else would you be after a night like this?" I let out a bitter laugh. "Yeah? And what kind of night is this, Richard?" He didn't answer. Instead, he signaled to Karen. "Water," and closed his tab. "Hey." I protested, but he ignored me. "You've had enough," he said firmly. I scoffed. "Not even close." Richard leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Listen, man. I know you're hurting, but getting blackout drunk in a dive bar isn't going to fix it." I exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over my face. "Then tell me, Richard, what will fix it?" He didn't have an answer, because there wasn't one. I stared at my empty glass, my reflection warped in the amber residue at the bottom. "She cheated on me." I muttered, more to myself than to him. My throat tightened. "She chose him." Richard sighed. "I know, man." She looked me in the eye and lied. My hands curled into fists. And the worst part? She actually thinks she had a reason. Like it's my fault. Like I made her do it. Richard was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Did you?" I snapped my head up, glaring at him. "Excuse me." He didn't flinch. "I'm not saying she's right, Greg. She screwed up. Big time. But if she was feeling that disconnected, if she was hurting, did you notice? Did you do anything about it?" The words cut deep. I hated that he asked. I hated that I didn't have an answer. Richard sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "Look, man, we've all been watching this slow-motion train wreck for a while now. You and Laura, there was something off. Maybe you didn't see it, maybe you didn't want to. But she was slipping away, and instead of grabbing her hand, you let her go." I clenched my jaw. "So what? That makes it okay." "No," Richard shook his head. "It just makes it real." I didn't respond. Because deep down, I knew he wasn't wrong. But it didn't make the betrayal hurt any less. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "What the hell am I supposed to do now?" Richard leaned back, watching me carefully. "First, you sober up." He patted my back. "Then you figure out what comes next." I let out a slow breath. What had come next? I had no idea. All I knew was that my marriage was shattered, my wife was a stranger, and the only thing left of the life I'd built was the bitter taste of whiskey and regret. The first thing I noticed when I woke up was the pounding in my skull. A dull, merciless throb that pulsed behind my eyes, making even the dim morning light filtering through the blinds unbearable. The second thing I noticed was the smell, whiskey, stale sweat, and regret clinging to me like a second skin. I groaned, forcing myself upright, and immediately regretted it. The world tilted violently, my stomach churning in protest. Jesus, Greg, you look like hell. I turned my head slowly, wincing at the movement. Richard stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching me like I was some wounded animal. What time is it? My voice came out hoarse, dry. Late enough, he said. You slept like a damn corpse. I rubbed a hand over my face, trying to push through the haze. Where the hell am I? My place, Richard said. Dragged your sorry ass home after Mose. Figured if I left you there, you'd either end up in jail or passed out in a gutter. I let out a dry, humorless chuckle. Sounds about right. Richard tossed me a bottle of water. Drink. You look like you're about to drop dead. I twisted off the cap and took a long sip, my throat burning with dehydration. The fog in my head didn't lift completely, but it was enough for me to register the weight pressing on my chest. Laura. The memory of last night slammed into me like a freight train. The fight, the confession, the way she had looked at me, desperate and pleading, trying to justify the unforgivable. I clenched my jaw. She actually tried to blame me. I muttered, more to myself than Richard. He sighed, leaning against the wall. Yeah, I figured that was coming. I looked up at him. She said I wasn't there for her, that she was lonely. Like that justifies what she did. Richard was quiet for a moment before he said, doesn't justify it, but does it explain it? I scowled. Don't start with that. I'm not taking her side, Greg, he said. But if she felt like she was losing you, and you didn't notice, she could have talked to me. My voice was sharp, my fingers tightening around the water bottle. She could have told me how she felt. Instead, she ran to him. Richard exhaled slowly, nodding. Yeah, she did. That silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. A knock on the front door shattered it. I didn't have to ask who it was. I felt it in my bones. Richard hesitated. You want me to? No. I swung my legs over the couch, forcing myself to stand. My head swam, but I ignored it. I'll handle it. Richard gave me a look, then nodded. I'll be in the kitchen. I took a deep breath, steadied myself, and walked to the door. When I opened it, Laura stood there, arms wrapped around herself, looking like a ghost of the woman I once knew. Her eyes were red, her face pale. She had been crying. Greg, she whispered. I didn't say anything. I just stared at her. She shifted nervously. Can I come in? I didn't move. Why? She swallowed hard. Because we need to talk. I exhaled through my nose, then stepped aside, letting her in. She hesitated for a moment, then walked past me, the scent of her perfume lingering in the air, a scent that once felt like home but now made my stomach twist. She stood in the living room, wringing her hands. I stayed near the door, arms crossed. Say what you need to say, I told her. Laura took a shaky breath. I don't even know where to start. Try the truth, I said coldly. For once. She flinched. Greg, I never meant to hurt you. I let out a bitter laugh. Yeah? Because you did a damn good job of it. Tears welled up in her eyes. I know I did. And I hate myself for it. But I need you to understand. I don't need to understand, Laura. My voice was sharp, cutting. I need to know why. She looked at me, her lips trembling. Because I felt like I didn't matter to you anymore. I inhaled sharply, anger and exhaustion crashing together. So instead of telling me, you ran to Jake? She wiped at her face. I didn't plan for it to happen. But it did, I snapped. Twice. That's not a mistake, Laura. That's a choice. She let out a soft sob, shaking her head. I was lonely, Greg. I wanted to feel wanted. I stared at her, my heart hammering. And did he make you feel that way? She hesitated. And that pause, that damn pause, was enough. I turned away, jaw tightening. Jesus Christ. Greg, please, she begged. I still love you. I swear I do. I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing down the bile rising in my throat. Did she? Did it even matter? Tell me the truth, I said, voice dangerously low. If Jake never told me, if he never let it slip, would you have ever told me? Silence. And then, in the quietest voice, she whispered, no. I nodded slowly, swallowing the lump in my throat. That was it. That was the moment I knew. I turned back to her, meeting her teary gaze. Then we have nothing left to talk about. Her breath hitched. Greg. I stepped past her and opened the door. Go home, Laura. She didn't move, didn't speak. She just stood there, staring at me, as if she could will me to change my mind. But I was done. After a long moment, she finally stepped outside. I shut the door behind her, and for the first time since this nightmare started, I felt something close to relief. I stood there for a long time after the door closed, my fingers still gripping the handle like I needed something to hold on to. My heart was hammering, my head still pounding from last night's whiskey, and yet, beneath it all, there was this strange, unsettling clarity. Laura was gone, and for the first time, I knew, really knew, that I couldn't take her back. I should have felt relief, but all I felt was the slow, crushing weight of finality. I turned, exhaling sharply, and found Richard standing in the kitchen doorway. He'd heard everything. He didn't say a word, just held out a steaming mug of coffee. I took it without a thank you, sipping it even though my stomach was a battlefield of nerves and regret. So, Richard finally said, crossing his arms. That's it. I nodded. That's it. He studied me for a second, then sighed. Then why do you look like you just lost a war? I swallowed hard, staring down at the dark liquid in my cup. Because I did. We didn't speak for a while. Just the occasional sound of coffee cups hitting the table, the distant hum of traffic outside. Then, I did something I hadn't let myself do since this whole mess started. I asked myself the question, could I have saved this? Could I have done something, anything, before Laura ever crossed that line? Had I been so caught up in work, in responsibilities, in life, that I didn't see my own marriage unraveling right in front of me? Maybe, but I also knew something else. Even if I had neglected her, even if I had failed to notice the signs, I hadn't betrayed her. I hadn't lied. I hadn't let someone else touch me in a way that was meant only for her. And that was the difference. That was why I couldn't stay. I ran a hand through my hair, inhaling deeply. I need to do one last thing. Richard frowned. What's that? I looked up at him, my voice steady. I need her to cut ties with Sophie. His eyebrows shot up. You really think she'll do that? She says she wants to fix this, I said. She says she'll do anything to save our marriage. I set my cup down, my jaw tightening. Let's see if that's true. I met Laura at the house. Our house. The place we had built together. The place where we had fought, laughed, made love, and raised our children. Now, it felt like a crime scene. She was already there when I arrived, standing in the dimly lit living room, arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold herself together. She looked up the second I stepped inside, her face hopeful. Greg, she breathed, as if I was a lifeline. You came. I ignored the emotion in her voice. I had a mission. I shut the door behind me, staying near the entryway. I need to ask you something, I said. Anything, she said quickly. Whatever it takes, I'll do it. I stared at her, my heart hammering even though I already knew how this would end. Cut ties with Sophie. The words were simple, but their weight hit her like a slap. Her face fell. Greg, what? You heard me, I said, my voice unwavering. You want to prove to me that you're serious about fixing this? Cut Sophie out of your life. No more texts, no more visits, no more talking. She's gone. Laura's lips parted, but no words came out. Her hands trembled. She took a step toward me. Greg, she's my best friend. I clenched my jaw. She's also the person who encouraged this. She helped you destroy our marriage. Tears welled up in her eyes. She didn't make me do anything. No, I said, my voice sharp. But she didn't stop you, either. Laura wiped at her face, shaking her head like she couldn't believe what I was asking. You're making me choose. I let out a dry, humorless laugh. Damn right I am. I took a step closer, lowering my voice. Because I never should have had to. She blinked rapidly, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. Greg, please don't do this. I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to stay calm. I didn't do this, Laura. You did. A long, painful silence stretched between us. I saw it then. The realization. The moment she understood what I already knew. She wouldn't cut Sophie off. No matter how much she claimed to love me. No matter how much she swore she wanted to fix this. Because, in the end, I was never her first choice. Sophie was. Her friend. Her real partner. I swallowed hard, my voice barely above a whisper. I can't do this anymore. She let out a choked sob. Greg, please. I shook my head. It's over. She collapsed onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. Her shoulders shook violently, her cries filling the room like the ghost of something that had already died. I turned, walked to the front door, and opened it. I hesitated for just a moment. Then, without another word, I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. And just like that, the life I had built, the future I thought I'd have, was gone. I drove away from that house knowing I'd never return. Not as Laura's husband, not as the man who once thought love could conquer anything. The papers were filed within a month. At first, she fought it. There were late-night calls filled with sobs, desperate text messages. Even a few times she showed up at my workplace, humiliating herself in front of my staff, begging me to reconsider. "I'll do anything, Greg. Just don't leave me." But she never cut Sophie off. That was all I needed to know. The first few months after the divorce were brutal. I kept myself busy, long hours at work, extra time with the kids, anything to stop my mind from replaying those final moments over and over again. But the silence followed me everywhere. I missed her. Not the woman she had become, but the woman I thought she was. The woman I had built a life with. The one I used to come home to after a long day, who would curl up next to me on the couch, stealing bites of my food like it was hers all along. But that woman was gone. She had been gone long before I ever caught her with Jake. The real Laura, the one she had hidden from me, was someone I never truly knew. And that was what hurt the most. I wasn't sure why I agreed to go. Maybe it was Richard's relentless nagging, or maybe I just wanted to prove to myself that I wasn't the same shattered man from last year. Same house, same decorations, same group of people. But this time, I wasn't alone. Her name was Rachel. We had only been dating for a few months, but she was good to me. Kind, patient, understanding. She didn't pry about Laura, didn't push me to talk about things I wasn't ready to. She just let me breathe. That night, as we stepped inside, I felt it immediately. The whispers, the stolen glances. People still remembered. Of course, they did. Last year, this party had been the scene of my public execution. Richard was the first to greet us, grinning like an idiot as he clapped a hand on my shoulder. "Look at you," he said, smirking. "Brought a date this time. That's progress." I chuckled, shaking my head. Yeah, don't make a big deal out of it." Rachel, ever the good sport, just laughed and squeezed my hand. The party carried on, the drinks flowed, and for the first time in a long time, I felt okay. Until I saw her. Laura. She was standing near the fireplace, sipping wine, looking like a ghost from my past. Our eyes met, and for a moment, everything around me faded. She still wore the same perfume. She still tilted her head the same way when she was lost in thought. But she wasn't mine anymore. And I wasn't hers. Sophie was with her, of course. The two of them inseparable, as always. They noticed Rachel at the same time. Sophie sneered, whispering something into Laura's ear. Laura just stared. Rachel squeezed my hand. "You okay?" I exhaled, forcing a small smile. "Yeah, I am." And for the first time, I meant it. Laura and I don't talk much anymore. We keep things civil for the kids, but the connection we once had? It's gone. She and Sophie are still close, just like I knew they would be. Jake? He moved out of town shortly after the fallout, too ashamed to show his face. As for me, I learned something valuable from all of this. Love isn't just about passion. It's about choices. Every single day, you wake up and choose your partner. You choose loyalty. You choose to fight for what you have. Laura made her choice. And now, I'm making mine. I choose myself. And this time, I'm not looking back. Looking back, I see things more clearly now. It took losing everything to understand what I should have known all along. Love isn't just about feelings. It's about commitment. It's about showing up, even when things aren't perfect. Laura didn't just betray me. She abandoned our marriage before she ever touched Jake. And maybe, in some ways, I abandoned her too, without even realizing it. But the truth is, we all have choices. She had a choice to talk to me, to fight for us, to work through the struggles like partners should. Instead, she walked away in silence, seeking comfort elsewhere. And that's the real lesson. A strong marriage isn't built on grand gestures. It's built on everyday choices. Choosing to listen, choosing to communicate, choosing to stay when things get hard. For those who've lived long enough to see love in all its forms, you know this. Relationships don't die overnight. They fade when we stop choosing each other. So if you still have the chance, if you have someone worth holding on to, choose them. Talk to them. Love them. Because once the door closes, sometimes it never opens again.